country. That's what I'm very shocked by.
Yeah, I'm worried about my son. I'm gonna have to get, the other day I sent him out to get the laundry out of the dryer and he comes back, he's 15, he comes back and he goes, which one's the dryer? I was like, oh no, I'm in trouble.
That's not.
I heard there's been some of these like last time.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right, we have two speakers today. One is here, one will arrive a little bit later, from Health Sciences and Human Services. And so I'm streaming this for Zoom. I'll save the PowerPoint as I have before I run into all, so if you want to look at it again. And I guess welcome to our class, Dr. Anderson, and I'll let you talk more about yourself.
All
I
right.
haven't done the PowerPoint projecting, or not, I'm projecting it, but I don't have it showing.
Okay, yeah, got it. So I'm excited to be able to talk to you guys today. My name is Dr. Jennifer Anderson. Y'all met me the other day on the tour. And today I'm going to share with you a little more about respiratory therapy. Specifically, I'm going to talk about what respiratory therapists do, some research that we do as respiratory therapists, and then also I figured y'all might be interested in hearing a little bit about what respiratory therapy's role is in the pandemic. So I'm going to talk about all of those things in about 30 minutes. Along the way, if you have questions, feel free to stop me, ask questions, or if it is whatever works. I'm very open. I like interactive classes, so excited to share about respiratory therapy with you. So basically, we kind of talked about this on the tour. Respiratory therapists specialized in, we're the healthcare practitioners that are trained in heart and lungs, okay? So we specialize in cardiopulmonary medicine. We really are in many different aspects in the hospital, outside the hospital, but we deal with acute, critical, chronic, cardiac, and pulmonary disease. Anyone in here have asthma or know someone who has asthma? All right, so you may have seen a respiratory therapist. I'm sure you've seen nebulizers or inhalers, those sorts of things. We help with that. So I'm going to show just a little short video about being a respiratory therapist. Hopefully.
I'm a respiratory therapist.
I am a respiratory therapist.
I'm a respiratory therapist and I save lives.
A respiratory therapist is a professional who has been trained to work with patients who are affected with chronic lung disease across the spectrum.
So anything that affects your breathing, a respiratory therapist is likely going to be involved in the care of that patient. A respiratory therapist is not only a therapist, but a practitioner. We help patients in so many different capacities, not only with breathing, but with education, with lifestyle. So we have many different roles throughout healthcare. It can involve working in a hospital such as the ICU, in the neonatal ICU. We can work in the emergency department. We can work in diagnostics and therapeutics. We do outpatient education. We do smoking cessation, asthma education. We work in pediatrics. So, you know, a respiratory therapist, we hold so many different roles that really help the community in so many different ways.
I'm a respiratory therapist.
I'm a respiratory therapist and I care for my patients breath by breath.
The thing I like most about it is the variety of the day and the variety of the career. In the hospital I'm at, we have neonates all the way up to adults. We have a burn ICU, trauma ICU, so we can be anywhere at any time of the day.
There is always a patient that needs something unique. Sometimes there are physicians that have different needs that we have to take care of.
Obviously, it starts off finding out where I'm at, where I'm assigned to, getting a report from the night shift, seeing what the plan is for the patients, and then going to see every patient, doing rounds.
I work in pediatrics, so I may get 5 patients, may get 6 patients, but they're patients that need help with breathing. And my job is to provide them with their treatments. A typical day would be going from giving a treatment to maybe a 5 or 6-year-old that's slightly sick, then going into an intensive care unit, somebody that's much more ill, and every decision that I make on how to set that life support machine could affect their outcome.
We have so many different pieces of equipment, and they all do so many different things, from a wide variety of life support equipment to sustaining equipment to equipment that just will deliver oxygen.
So a typical day is checking equipment, meeting with our people, or we also will go in-house and check on the therapists in-house to see if they need anything. But primarily we're waiting for calls, and they come. We usually do 2 to 4 transports a night. They can be anywhere from 2 or 3 hours long to 6 hours long, or sometimes even beyond the shift.
We see each patient anywhere from 1 time a day to 6 times a day, depending on the type of patient.
Day will typically end right about 5, 6 o'clock in the evening, so about 12-hour days. I'm a respiratory therapist.
I'm a respiratory therapist, and I love taking care of people.
I worked in a teaching hospital, so it was routine that we always had students, following us. Precepting students was one of our responsibilities. So that's how I got into education. I became a clinical instructor. That also opened another door for me when a program director position became available.
Empowering the patient to manage their chronic lung disease so that they understand that they can live a good life. It's about quality of life. So I feel that if I can help teach them on how to handle their chronic lung disease, it's about having the confidence that they're going to be okay.
The education and dealing with the patients, it's very satisfying to me. You go in a room with someone you haven't seen in a while, but they look at you, the family looks at you, and they remember you, and they're happy to see you. And that makes my day. It makes it all worth it. So I'm a respiratory therapist.
I'm a respiratory therapist.
I'm a respiratory therapist, and I make a difference.
All right, so that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview of the role of a respiratory therapist. Before I went into education, I was a neo-PD respiratory therapist. So I worked at Dallas Children's. Have any of y'all familiar with Dallas Children's? Close to UT Southwestern, right downtown Dallas. So I really enjoyed taking care of the pediatric population. As respiratory therapists, once you graduate and get your credentials, you're able to specialize in different areas. So you can specialize in NEOPD, adult critical care. We have therapists that you saw on there that do transport, that go on and become PAs, perfusionists. So they're the people that run the heart-lung machines. So basically bypass for a longer period of time. So we even have graduates that have gone on to work in organ donation, which is pretty neat. A lot of our graduates, like we said the other day, go into leadership roles, management roles, those sorts of things, because we are one of only 5 schools in the state of Texas that has a bachelor's degree program. So there's lots of different things that you can do in the respiratory therapy profession. All right, so next I'm just going to talk a little about different types of research that we do in our profession. A lot of the research that we do is what we call evidence-based practice. So we really are interested in patient outcomes and what we can do with best practice to positively affect our patient outcomes. So we do a lot of studies and we look at the outcomes and how that's going to affect our patients. And then that's deemed best practice and drives how we care for our patients in the future. So a good example of that would be, I said that respiratory therapists give nebulizer treatments. That's the aerosolized medication that helps open up your airways, right? So one example of evidence-based practice studies, clinical trials, would be looking at different devices that we deliver that aerosolized medication with, and how we can better optimize the delivery of that medication to help it open up the airways faster, right? Our engineering majors could help with these sorts of things, because you can help design, different ways that we can deliver those that medication. We are also looking at the drugs, right? The drugs are changing all the time. We're always looking for new types of drugs that have less side effects and that are better for our patients. So in the medical field, once you graduate, you are continuously learning, because what we're teaching our students now will be obsolete literally in 4 years, okay? The technology changes, medications change. So you're constantly needing this research to find the best type of practice to provide your patients with the best outcomes possible. I will tell you, we never thought that we didn't even know about COVID. So COVID hasn't even been in our curriculum until lately, right? Of course, we go back to our basics and we look at what COVID is doing to our patients. But there's lots of research going on right now on how we can best care for our COVID patients and optimize their breathing, because we know that oftentimes it's going to be respiratory related issues due to that disease. We also look at different types of interprofessional research. You guys got to see our interprofessional room and talk to Dr. Case about the different interprofessional scenarios that we do here on campus. Well, we know in healthcare, it's not just one profession taking care of those patients. We all have to work together to help treat our patients. So we do a lot of research with different professions to find, again, what works best for your patients. I talked about clinical research trials. Another aspect of research that we do is educational research. So we're constantly looking at how can we better train respiratory therapists, future respiratory therapists. Even in the world today, one thing we're looking at is mental health issues and burnout, right? Our therapists, our nurses, our doctors are tired. They are working constantly. They are seeing things they have never seen before. And I'm going to talk about some of the things here in a minute and actually have some videos from one of our graduates talking about the pandemic. But one of the things we're researching right now is what can we do for these practitioners to help with that burnout, to help with self-care, and to help take care of them. Because it's what we tell our patient family members. We've told them for years, if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your family member, right? So we've got to find ways to help these practitioners that are out there in the front lines with self-care and burnout. So in respiratory care specifically, we have a couple of different journals. Respiratory care is our biggest journal. It's going to be more of your clinical-based research. We have all kinds of publications in there, and Respiratory Care Education Annual is more of a journal for educators to do their research and provide information about teaching and student outcomes. So these are just some examples of different types of articles that you might see in our journal. Again, we're looking at different devices, how to better treat our patients on ventilators, looking at you know, those teeny tiny babies, you wouldn't think that they were very feisty, but sometimes they can be. They'll be turning their little heads and we'll have what we call unplanned extubation, where that breathing tube that we have down comes out. Well, if they don't have that airway, they're not gonna be able to breathe. So we're constantly looking at better ways to secure that endotracheal tube and keep it in place so that they can breathe. So there's a lot of research that goes into that. Those babies, their skin is not fully developed, right? Because they're so tiny, their skin is so fragile. So you think, oh, well, that should be pretty easy. You stick the tube in, they can't really move around a whole lot. But you think about it, their skin is paper thin, so you've got to find different ways to secure that airway and keep it in place. So there's all kinds of research constantly going on, again, to better care for your patients. All right, so now I'm going to move into what the respiratory therapist's role is in this pandemic that we're in. Okay, this is a video about a respiratory therapist that is working in the front lines. Kind of give you an overview.
People now know what a respiratory therapist does. It's not just asthma medications. We are front lines. We are side by side with the nurses and doctors helping make those decisions on the vent. I have currently been working in the COVID ICU since it started. I have not gotten sick. I have not passed this on to my family. I feel safe. I really enjoy my team I work with. They look out for me and I look out for them, and it's, without being a soldier myself, this is the closest thing that I can put it to, is that I trust the people that I walk in the front door with. The exciting part about our job is also the double-edged side of our job. We see positives and we see the negatives. There's been a lot of hardships, and where previously we might have your child or your mom or your loved one come and sit at your bedside, and that can help calm you down and get us through those tough situations. With the new COVID rules and the world we live in now, we have not had visitors at the hospital. It's to try to keep that fear at a minimal for our patients and to not let them see our concerns at the same time has been a very challenging way to level it out. But you have to be the courageous ones. We have to be the courageous ones. A lot of these touching situations of people who do really well can really drive on our raw emotions, because we are so topsy-turvy, from the critical to the people who are making it, the people who are surviving to the people who are not. Luckily, recently, there's been a lot of success, and they really help drive you through and keep you going for the next case that comes through the door.
All right, so the next video I'm going to show you is actually one of our grads. She graduated in 2019 from our online completion program. And she originally worked in Austin, has been working as a respiratory therapist for a while, but then when the pandemic hit, she volunteered to go to New York. And several news stations picked her up, and these are some of her stories from working in New York.
Hi, all my fellow RTs. I am coming to you from the front line in the middle of New York. The shifts here are often hectic, fast-paced. You barely have time to eat, much less drink and use the bathroom. Sorry, I thought you could see what I actually look like. Whew, this is what we wear. It's hard to process how horribly ill so many patients are. This virus is brutal and vicious and does not discriminate. These are the sickest patients I've ever seen. We have dentists, guys, dentists running our equipment, running our blood gases, and their staff are cleaning our equipment. Thank God for them because we don't have time to do it ourselves. We are often facing this virus without proper PPE. It's not the hospital's fault. They can't supply what simply doesn't exist. It adds to the stress, though, that we already feel having to hunt down protection at the beginning of the shift. No one was prepared for the amount of people that would need our care. On the upside, I made some great new friends, my nurses and RTs. We are brave and strong, caring and compassionate. We hold our patients' hands and sing to them so they don't die alone. No one in my generation has ever had to face anything like this, but for what it's worth, we're doing the best we can. Stay safe, guys.
All right, so that was just a little snippet. If you guys want to hear more about her actual documentations of her time while she was in New York, if you'll go to that slide I was just on the bottom, there's a link to an NPR interview. It's about 4 minutes long, and she will give an account of like her day-to-day life when she was there. This was, right when the pandemic hit, and it was just blowing up in New York. So it's pretty interesting to listen to her story about being there in New York. So as respiratory therapists, of course, like I said, we're trained in the heart and lungs. We're trained to put our patients on ventilators. But this disease has been something like we have never seen before. One of the things that we have been researching and we know that is helping our patients is when we put them in what we call the prone position. So what does that mean? I know y'all had, some of y'all have had A&P. So what is prone? Prone is face up. So on your belly, right? So you can imagine if you have a patient that is sedated and they're on a ventilator, they have a breathing tube down, and they're not able to move on their own, what we need to do is turn them on their bellies. How many people do you think that takes to turn them on their belly?
Probably like 5.
At least. It takes up to 7 people to turn that patient onto their stomachs. And why would y'all think, you guys are honor students, I know you're super smart, but why would it be a good idea to put these patients on their bellies? Why would that help them, do you think? There's no wrong answer, just throw it out there.
It's less pressure on the lungs, maybe?
You're on the right track. Mm-hmm. What else?
Helps them relax, maybe.
Not really relax, but so basically when you turn that patient on their belly, think of gravity, right? Think of your lungs. When they're on their belly, what we're able to do is when we have that breathing tube in and they're hooked up to the ventilator, we're giving them high concentrations of oxygen, because what's happening is their lungs are getting very stiff, right? A little alveoli in the lungs are super stiff, and we're having trouble what we call diffusing oxygen into their lungs. So when you take a breath, you normally are able to take that breath in and get oxygen and oxygenate it throughout the body. I don't know if y'all studied the blood flow of the heart and that sort of thing. But what we do when we put them on their stomach, gravity helps with the blood flow, and we're able to better what we call diffuse the oxygen when they're on their stomach. So it helps to increase their oxygenation, and we're better able to get that oxygen throughout the body where it needs to go. But that's no small feat. It takes about, like I said, 7 people to turn on their stomach.
Sorry.
And you guys have probably heard, when you're in that situation and you're in that critical condition, you can't turn on your own, right? So then they can't stay there forever. So we have to find ways to prop them up or they'll get bed sores and things like that. So then you have to go in and turn them again and make sure that they're not getting any kind of bed sores or anything like that. So to take care of these COVID patients takes a lot of manpower. And when they go into that room, all those 7 people to go turn that patient on their belly, they have to gown up in all this gear, and they put on a full, I call it a bunny suit, but you'll have seen the PPE. They don all of that. They have the shields, they have a mask, they have gloves, they have booties, they have hair covers. That just putting on the equipment takes probably a good, 5 to 10 minutes to get that on. They all go in there, they do what they need to do, and then they come out. Well, when they come out, there's a process to take everything off. It's called the donning process, because you have to be very specific on how you take it off, because you don't want to contaminate yourself as you're taking it off if you've been in there with that COVID patient. And they literally have someone outside the room spraying that person down. Not kidding. Spraying them down with disinfectant. Not on their scrubs, it's on the PPE, they spray the PPE down before they take it off. So the whole process of going in and out is, y'all saw my graduate, how sweaty she was, because you're in all this gear, taking it on and off all day long. Imagine how exhausting that can get. A lot of times they're trying to keep our monitors, and we can actually move the ventilator monitors outside the patient's room. And so, not ideal, but we can monitor the patient outside the room so they don't have to yell and don up so many times to go in there. But you can also see on the patient side what they were talking about, how hard it is on the patients because they don't have anyone in there with them. It's lonely, and then it's such an ordeal to go in and take care of the patient. Oftentimes, they don't see healthcare providers as much as we would like to see them. So it's a very difficult time, trying time. It's mentally and physically exhausting on everyone right now. Dr. Garrison suggested that I mention kind of what we're doing here at MSU to help with the pandemic. Well, of course, we're trying to train our radiology technicians, our respiratory therapists, our nurses, all these guys to get out there in the hospital. We're trying to get on as soon as we can. But we also were able to provide, during the pandemic when we shut down in March, we loaned our ventilators to United Regional because y'all heard there was a ventilator shortage. In the event that they needed to use extra ventilators, they are able to use the ones that we have here that we teach with. Our ventilators are, like we said the other day, state of the art. Some of them are even ahead of what they have in the hospitals now. So we were able to loan those. We do have them back because we are using them to teach, but we have an open contract with United Regional where if there is an emergency, we could take our ventilators over there and they are more than welcome to use them. We also donated some of our PPE that we had, our N95s and things like that. So we do try to help out the community as much as we can during the difficult times because they're helping us change. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. But. So I always like to leave with just a quote, and this is kind of a quote in my department that we think about all the time. As respiratory therapists, to know one life has breathed easier because you have lived, this is to have succeeded. So that's why we love respiratory, because we feel like if we can help one person breathe better, like the first guy said in the video, it is trying times. But when you see those patients get better and walk out the door, you know you made a difference. That's what it's all about. So that is my spiel about respiratory therapy. Does anyone have any questions before I turn it over to Dr. Belay? Nope. Okay. Well, thank y'all for your time.
Just want me to stop it. sharing?
Well, do you have a PowerPoint?
She has one student on
Okay.
Zoom.
Oh, okay.
So what we can do is escape her PowerPoint.
And then start yours. Let's see, I probably have a lot of things open. Sorry.
You really should go to listen to.
It's not a US.
Her name is Julie
It
Sullivan.
is that one over on the far side.
NPR.
It's just which, yeah, it's just which
Log,
direction it
log.
goes.
It's pretty good.
There we go.
Her name is Julie Sullivan,
Thanks.
and on my PowerPoint, I think you're gonna post it, right?
I am, yeah.
It's
And
on
I'm
this
gonna see where
slide
I can put it up on
with the
detail.
picture of her. At the bottom it says NPR, and there's a link, and I'll go straight to the blog.
So our next speaker is from a different department in health sciences, so it's Dr. Beth Lloyd. So I'll let you go ahead and.
Hey. So you're the smart kids, right? So you'll forgive me because I'm not that smart a kid. But oh gosh, I'm not even a kid. I forgot that part. So what I decided to do was kind of give you a perspective of radiologic science instead of telling you how wonderful we are and lovely we are. I wanted to tell you how we've changed from when x-rays were discovered. Does anybody know when that was? November 8th, 1895. Did you know that? Well, you were going to guess though. I'm real proud of you. So in the beginning, we had this guy named Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, who he wasn't born in 1924. He was born in 1824. That's my typo. So sorry. And he died in 1920. And then during the time that he was around, I want you to think about 1895 and see what you remember from those years. Nothing? You might remember more than you think. But what's interesting about Röntgen is he was kicked out of high school for behavior in 1865. He just was kind of a rebel kid, which is really interesting because the area of Germany he came from, those families, the men tend to be very, very quiet, very, very laid back, kind of a farming community. And he was a very quiet kid till he got to high school. And then he just caused all kinds of trouble. And I think a lot of it was he just didn't attend. He didn't want to be there. So when he wanted to go to college, he had to test into college. So he couldn't get into where he was from in Linnet, Germany. So he had to go to Switzerland to get his, and he went and got his PhD. And he was experimenting with vacuum tubes by passing electrical discharge through them. There should be a through there too. Oh Lord. So sorry. And the interesting thing is that he didn't make the X-ray tube. He didn't make the glass tube that he was using, the vacuum tube. Do you know why they called them vacuum tubes, by the way? Because they had to vacuum them to use them. So, you know, a light bulb is a vacuum, right? Now they can do it by machine. At that time, they actually had tubes in the tube, and they had to pedal and vacuum out all the air before you could get the filament to burn. Okay, so you know, can you imagine the scientists of those days standing there like, "I'll be right with you," vacuuming out the tube to get it to work. And he had a fluorescent screen that he didn't place for this purpose. He just had a glass plate that had fluorescent material on it that he was experimenting with to look at electricity. He had a few feet away. Well, he turned on this tube and passed an electrical charge through it, and all of a sudden this fluorescent tube that was across the room lit up. And he said, "Ach so, a neues kind of X-ray," right? And so that's why it got called X-ray, because the X was unknown in science, right? So it has sort of kept the name X, even though we know a lot about it. He was so excited. Oh my God, look what I found, right? He, within a few days, had assigned about 11 properties to X-rays. You can't see them, you can't touch them, you can't taste them, you can't feel them, you know, all this kind of stuff. He was only wrong on one of the 11 traits. Do you know what that was? Wild guess? Yes. That's right. He said they were great. There was no harm to them. Of course, as years went on, we found out a little different, right? So this was November 8, 1895. And as soon as he discovered this, he just never left his lab. And if you ever saw a picture of his lab, well, I'm going to show you one. It's really crazy because has anybody ever been to Marie Curie's museum in Paris? If you ever get a chance, go. It's just so cool. They have all the equipment she ever used in one display case that's about as long as this table and about that tall. And mostly it was weights and calipers and things to measure things with. That's it. She didn't have anything electronic. She didn't have anything electric. She didn't have anything like that. And she discovered radium. Isn't that amazing? So he wrote his findings up and wrote about X-rays, X being the unknown. And 6 weeks after the discovery, he brought his beautiful wife, Bertha, in there and took an X-ray of her hand. That's her hand up in the corner. So that's her wedding ring and her hand. And he X-rayed her a number of times. And she suffered radiation burns because of that. In 1901, he received the very first Nobel Prize in physics. And the interesting part about, which I think is pretty funny, because he was really quiet. So Kaiser Wilhelm, at the time, talked to him, sent him a message or saw him in person. I'm not sure which. I wasn't actually there. But he said, that was funny. Come on. Okay. So he said to the Kaiser, or the Kaiser told him, you're getting the first Nobel Peace Prize in physics, the very first one. And Röntgen said, do I have to speak? And he said, no, you don't have to give a speech. He goes, okay, I'll take it then. The cool thing that he did about his discovery is he never patented it. He never claimed anything out of it. He made no money of it off it for his own. He gave it to the world, period. I'm not sure any of us would be that magnanimous. I know I would be. I'd be like, I'll tell you what it is if you pay me lots of money. But instead, he just gave it to the world to use. And I think part of the reason he did that is people like Crookes. Have you ever heard about Crookes? Heard of a Crookes tube? A glass envelope with a filament in it, and for Röntgen, had a target in it. A little piece of metal that when you threw the electrons across the circuit, when you close the circuit, it would slam into this piece of metal and stop very quickly. In German, that's called Bremsstrahlen, and that is braking, like braking of a car, stopping. So when you take an electron and you slam it against something really fast and stop it, it turns into an X-ray photon. Do you use anything every day that might produce some radiation? Yes. Phones? What else?
Microwave.
I'm sorry?
Microwave.
I still didn't understand you.
I'm sorry, microwave.
Microwaves? No, they're microwaves. They don't produce X-rays, they produce microwaves. Televisions. You have a stream of electrons that go back and forth across that fluorescent screen, and it actually produces radiation. So when parents told you, if they did when you were little, back up from the TV, it hurt your eyes, it was true. We have less radiation in the screens now, especially ones that are LED and plasma. They don't produce radiation, but the normal fluorescent screen does. In 2004, the element numbered 111 was named Röntgenium in his honor. Isn't that amazing? The guy just, you know, he had in his lab, he had this really thick wooden door. And after he discovered the fluorescence of this screen, he left the tube on and walked into his office and set the fluorescent screen down and shut the door. Was working on writing some notes up and turned around and it was still fluorescing. So he radiated himself. He died of colon cancer, which basically was a result of radiation dose. So 1895, 1901, those little years there was a boon for radiology. Oh my gosh, we can see inside people. What's the cool thing about seeing inside somebody? What's the big advantage for the patient?
You don't have to do exploratory surgery.
Yeah, you don't cut them open because people just don't like that. Now let me see if you have a bullet in your brain. He's just not the same anymore. So, you know, if they could determine that it wasn't really affecting them and it wasn't causing any problems, this is really helpful. So at Johns Hopkins Hospital, there were some docs and scientists talking and said, gosh, you know, we need somebody to do all these x-rays. And there was a janitor who said, I'll do it. I'd love to do it. Okay, so the old pictures of Johns Hopkins shows a really wide staircase, big, 50 feet across. And doors on both sides of underneath the stairway, and that's where the janitor lived. That's where he had all his equipment. So he moved some things aside, and there is his laboratory down in the basement. Now what you'll see here is we have an x-ray tube here, and we have this scope, and he's holding his own hand up so he can see it through this scope. It had a fluorescent screen inside it, so it was lighting up due to the radiation. So this is what they looked at. They called those röntgenoscopes, so that you would have a source underneath, which is this tube right here, and it's generating x-rays 360 degrees, and there's a plate inside that röntgenoscope that's receiving the radiation through the patient, and a process called attenuation happens. And what that means is different body parts, right? You know, the liver is different from the kidneys, different from bone, different from muscle, different from skin. They absorb radiation differently. And so the more they absorb, the brighter white they show up on a screen. The less they absorb, the darker they are. Like air in the lungs doesn't absorb very much, so it's really dark on an x-ray. So that's what he's looking at. I don't know about the state of this patient. I have a feeling this guy's dead. He kind of looks like he's got pennies on his eyes or something. Something's not quite right with him. I don't have details on this particular picture. I just know it's that guy. And so here's another x-ray setup with a wheelchair that could lie back into a bed. So this is an early gurney that could also be a chair. And we're radiating this patient to see how they're doing. Don't you just love the clothes? Can you imagine working in a hospital all day long with that dress on? Ooh, and what they must have taken home. Yikes. So this is a physician, and he's looking at an x-ray. So at that time, x-rays were actually printed on glass plates. Can you imagine being the x-ray tech or the janitor and gathering up all these glass plates for the doctor to look at, hauling them around? I'm sure they broke quite a few of them. But I do have a couple of glass x-rays in my department. Kind of interesting to see. But they would have to hold them up to the light because at that time they didn't have a view box. They didn't have any way to look at them, so they just hold them up to the light to see them. So holding them up to candlelight at night was not very helpful. A lot of times patients had to wait to get treatment until the next day because there wasn't enough light to see the x-ray. Here's one where the guy's looking at the woman's chest. So he has his viewing mask on, the plate at the patient, and here is the tube unshielded, giving out radiation 360 degrees. So anyone could play because this was so exciting. This was like Facebook, Twitter. First, as soon as something new comes out, you guys have a hold of it. Like, what's that one, Fortnite? I mean, 2 seconds after Fortnite came out, everybody was addicted to it. And like this, right? Well, they needed people to do this. And of course, the doctors weren't going to do it. And so janitors, pharmacists, photographers, scientists, some doctors in their offices, and salesmen all took x-rays for a living. Isn't that exciting? Wouldn't you love that right now if you knew the person taking your x-ray was a janitor or a salesman? Best x-rays ever. We'll give you 2 for free. So all these x-ray machines came out. So look how pretty they are. They were in these beautiful wooden cabinets. All these, oh, they're just, I mean, they all came with wooden boxes that were polished and stained and sealed and just beautiful. How about that? Look at that angelic woman holding a radiating x-ray tube. Look what we have for you. Facts, not fancies. And if you read this, this is all salesman stuff. Then this guy in Minneapolis says, you can cure cancer by application of x-rays. Now, this is before we knew that there were dangers of x-rays. So if it's doing something to kill cancer, I wonder what else it's killing in the meantime. They didn't think of that for a while. So they were just radiating the Jesus out of everybody. Then they thought, radium, boy, it's radioactive. Ooh, and it fluoresces the heck out of a plate. Let's make people pretty. So they would radiate people, women. And so this thing on her cheek is a cancer that was caused by direct radiation to her face to get rid of a beauty mark, to make her look prettier. Well, I hate to tell her that she probably needed more than the radiation anyway, but look at that cheek. That's a horrible thing. She died from this. She lost her jaw. Her jaw completely deteriorated because of the radiation dose that was given. If you give enough radiation to cause that kind of cancer on a face, because it's not a blood producing organ, you've given them way too much. That shouldn't ever happen today. Then we came up with fluoro machines where you could step into it and look down into a screen and see your feet. So all the shoe stores had them. I think the last ones were outlawed in the 70s, but as a child, not that I'm that old, but you would go to, it was called Fedway or Montgomery Ward's, and you would go, and same thing like JCPenney or Dillard's, you'd go in to get new shoes and you'd put your feet in there and look down, you could see an x-ray, a live x-ray, which was blowing up your eyeballs while you were looking at it. And they would tell you whether or not you needed a change. So if you look at the first one, this is the woman's actual feet. And then they would show her this picture saying how your feet ought to look, because you can see how her foot has been formed by wearing pointy shoes, right? These are man's feet. So she's getting a comparison to man's feet who never wore pointy shoes. So they're saying, oh, we've got to get you some better shoes so your feet can relax and look better. Isn't that awesome? Meantime, they're both getting radiated like crazy. This is a spa day. Places like New York and Boston and Chicago had underneath the streets, and you can see it kind of looks like a mine shaft, right? They go in there with radium or uranium sources because radiation had such good benefits. It's just going to make you feel better and do better. So look at these people sitting in there getting their radiation for the day. Can you imagine doing that? If it said radiation, would you, oh, please. They actually had, I didn't include a picture of this, but they had photography studios in the day, only they were radiographs. So you would take your whole family in and they would use a pinhole camera, put x-ray film in it or a glass plate with stuff on it, and they bring it back to the proper distance. You could get an entire picture of your family radiated, and then they would develop it, and there you had your bones portrait of your entire family. You should look those up, they're pretty cool. So we thought this was all healthy, but Edison was brilliant, right? He had a great company. He had electric lights, right? So he says, X-ray. Well, I want in on this. I'll bet I can make some money off of this. So he had this assistant that he put out in public, and he used continuous X-ray or fluoroscopy to try to get a picture of his brain. So he had this fluoro plate here, and less than 4 feet away, he had this fluoro machine that radiated the guy for 18 hours. And they just could not get a picture of his brain. So Edison said, X-ray is useless. You can't get a picture of somebody's brain. This is how he damaged his eyes, was staring at that fluoroscope for hours and hours and hours. Why do you think he couldn't see the brain? Yes.
Doesn't absorb the rays?
It's homogeneous. It doesn't have a differential in it. You know, there's very little fluid in the brain, and the fluid that's in the brain has the same makeup as the brain. So when you take a regular x-ray, you can see bone, but you can't see brain because it's homogeneous. It looks all the same. This is one of the things we found out with CT exams early on, that if somebody had just had a traumatic brain injury, if you did the CT immediately, you couldn't see the brain bleed because the makeup of the blood and the brain was so similar that you had to wait a few hours before you could see the injury. So now we do MRI instead. Have you heard of the Radium Girls? There is a book, and I think there's a movie coming out that's called The Radium Girls. And they were this amazing blue-collar group of workers who painted the faces of watch dials so they would glow in the dark. And they used radium because it really loves to absorb light and glow in the dark. So what they would do is they would dip their paintbrush into the radium and they paint a little bit, and then they take the brush and put it in their mouth and twirl it around to make a nice point and dip it back in the paint again and paint these dials. Many of them lost their lips, their gums, some lost their jaws, some of them just simply died from ingesting the radium. They had terrible stomach problems. So someone brilliant decided to take one of these workers and put, as they started dying, and put them in front of fluorescent plate. And this is what they found. So we have a left-handed person here who is against the plate like this. Sorry, they're right-handed. They're like this. So this is the balancing arm. This is them doing this. That's their face. So they had them hold their hand like they were holding a paintbrush, balance themselves like they would on a table, and put their face against the plate. And that's how much radiation they have. So if you can imagine that just pouring off of them, of course, they're going home. They've got radium under their fingernails. They've got radium in their hands. They're exposing everybody they're around. And many, many of these women died. Welcome to Lost Wages. This is in the 1940s. Do you see the white? You see that right there? Anybody know what that is? Wild guess? Atomic bomb testing. They didn't tell any of these people. They didn't tell any of the partiers, the gamblers, that we're testing the atomic bomb where you can see the cloud. They had parties where people watched it. They took promotional pictures of beautiful woman, mom, sitting in the living room, looking out the window with her 2 or 3-year-old child watching too, with this enormous bomb blast in the past, because they just didn't believe it did anything. I believe the survivors and the loved ones of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would beg to differ about atomic bombs and what it does to people. So then we decided, let's try something else. Let's take some plutonium and put it in a reactor and balance it around, because we found out when we're making the atomic bomb that you can put a source, and if you keep it shielded, it doesn't do anything. And then if you can just barely open it, you can control the amount of radiation and it'll generate a lot of electricity. We lost a couple of people doing that. And so this is what is this?
Nuclear reactor.
Yeah, nuclear reactor. So that's what it looks like when it's working well. That's what it looks like when it melts down. Chernobyl, if you haven't seen the show about Chernobyl, you should watch it. It's very, very interesting, and how controversial all that was, and how nobody wanted to believe how much radiation it had. They have finally poured concrete on it and capped it, but the surrounding land is still radioactive. They found elk miles and miles away that tested positive for radiation poisoning. The cloud stopped short of Alaska, so we didn't get anything from it, but it was so dangerous. Here's what we've used x-rays for in the past. Am I running over your time?
Yeah, we ended at 10:50, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. There's Miss Atomic Bomb. This is one thing I did want to show you all. At one point, this Dr. Diefenbach of Philadelphia experimented on some Ethiopian men, and radiated them until their skin turned white. Well, we've come a long way, right? How do you think he made their skin turn white?
All the radiation made it shine.
He burned them. And many times when people with very dark skin are burned, the healing is white. They lose their pigment. So he just burned the crap out of them and then eventually killed them. These were some free chest x-ray vans that used to come around. TB was really prominent in the 50s. So that's what that was for. Radiology school, we used to dip them by hand instead of doing automatic. That's a dental machine in the 60s. First CT in the 70s. First MRI, that is Damadian, the one who actually invented it from electronic musical instruments. We now have view boxes and automatic processors. That's what our first, look at the gantry, the hole in there. Can you imagine having to go in there and have a test done? How claustrophobic that would be? This is how mammography has changed. From the beginning, you can barely see the breast up in here. Oops. Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I had so little time. Anyway, this is the difference between this and this is staggering. What's the big benefit of that?
Cancer.
How women are living because we're finding these cancers so much earlier. This is what a modern MRI CT would look like. Big gantry. Here is some functional imaging we're able to do now using CT, nuclear medicine with breathing some radioactive isotopes, and we get a motion showing that this has very little uptake of air. It's not really functioning. 2009, this was published. It was the Society of Nuclear Medicine's Image of the Year. And the cool thing about this is the tumors are found outside the bronchus, not in the bronchus. So even if they'd taken the person to surgery and scoped them, looked down in the bronchus, they would have found nothing. But this way they found that it was outside where they would normally have looked at, and they were able to save the patient. This is how far we've come. Spanish-American War, X-ray, modern. This one's a positive, this one's a negative, right? What's next is entirely up to y'all, because y'all are smart. It doesn't take a lot of equipment, just takes a desire. If y'all want to know more about X-ray, come see me anytime. Sorry for taking so much time. Thanks.
Sorry, I guess I should have. It's just an hour class. My class is just an hour. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday.
Oh,
And Steve's is longer, but mine is short.
well, yeah, I think Jennifer told me I was from 10:30 to 11 something, so that's my fault. I'm so sorry.
Send it again for the.
Okay, I'll stop there.
No, you're good, bro.
As soon as you give access, I'm just gonna